So why has the road to Brexit become so chaotic? Think back to the 8th of June 2017, General Election Day. The day Mrs May expected to get a majority of more than 100 seats, which would have given her the status and numbers to get her sort of Brexit deal through the House of Commons. Instead, she ended up with a hung parliament, dependent on a disgraceful deal she'd done with the DUP. From that day onwards, she was powerless. Her authority had disappeared and she had virtually no chance of getting any sort of Brexit deal through Parliament. From that day on, it was only a matter of time before we had the sort of shambles we've seen in the past few days. Her position got worse on Wednesday when she promised not to lead the Tories into the next election, which has entrenched her position of being in office but not in power. Mrs May should have resigned last June. We are where we are because of that fateful election.
To broaden it out, we are where we are because of that election. Yeah, you're probably right. But we're there because if you ask me to identify where the problems are, I would suggest there were two events, both of which actually fell on her predecessor's watch, David Cameron, with his going in February, the year of the referendum. And in fact, I think we can remind ourselves of what he said. And let's hear what the Prime Minister said, and then I'll tell you why I think that was slip number one.
I've negotiated a deal to give the United Kingdom special status inside the European Union. I will fly back to London tonight and update the Cabinet at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. This deal has delivered on the commitments I made at the beginning of this renegotiation process. I believe that this is enough for me to recommend that the United Kingdom remain in the European Union, having the best of both worlds.
So that was David Cameron after those negotiations, February in 2016, and it has been reported that people who wear sweaters, a bit like Majid, all the Europeans said, is this going to be enough? To which Mr Cameron replied, yes, I will get this through. Slip number one. Slip number two, and I've said this before on the show and I'll keep it really brief, something as momentous as this had to have a clearer percentage. It had to be probably 55 plays 45 at the least, or probably, and you run businesses, 60-40, because it is such a quantum leap. Unless I get a 60-40 or maybe 50, we stay with the status quo. Those are the slips I think we made.
Yeah, but if she had got a majority of 100...
Oh, yes.
She could probably... She would have had the authority. I mean, authority went that day, didn't it? Once you go into an election with a big lead and you come out with a minority government, you're in real trouble.
You know, I agree with everything you're saying, but I think we need to go back further, because the real issue, even if we had, imagine some dream leader scenario right now, Brexit was fundamentally based on a set of undeliverable promises that was never going to placate everybody. So my moment is this. Just have a look at what Michael Gove said. It should be win-win for us, and it will be if we vote to leave and we can maintain free trade, stop sending money, and also have control of our borders. It was this ideal that we will be in the best-case scenario. There will be no losses, and it was disingenuous. And people up and down the country, honest, reasonable people, voted thinking that it was going to make us better off, have more control and more money, and it wasn't true. And it's inevitable that whoever was running the show was going to come up against reality. Reality was going to hit. And I can't leave that without showing you this bloomin' bus. This bus, this is the thing. You know, people who don't know about the backstop and don't understand customs union and tariffs, they understand £350 million a week from the NHS. That speaks to people. They thought that they were voting for that money in their local hospital. That's not deliverable, and it's not just because Theresa May...
Well, Boris Johnson still says it is, by the way. I just have to throw that in. Who knows?
We'll come on to the popularity of him
his bus,
later.
Wasn't it?
It was his bus, but he stands by the figures.
Let's not forget Theresa May's promising to provide those funds if we vote for her deal. But no, I think, again, going before the point in time that you've identified, Greg, I think actually the big mistake was for the Prime Minister, her predecessor, David Cameron, to bargain the future constitutional relationship this country has with the European Union to settle an internal civil war, an internal dispute within his political party. He should not have called the referendum.
Which has only got worse.
But why the popularity of UKIP, then?
Well, that may well be the party needed. Perhaps the party needed to split. UKIP was popular, but it was, it was chipping away certain votes from certain sectors. Let's have a look at what David Cameron said at that time.
Democratic consent for the EU in Britain is now wafer thin. Some people say that pointing this out is irresponsible, that it creates uncertainty for business and puts a question mark over Britain's place in the European Union. But the question mark is already there. Ignoring it is not going to make it go away. That is why I am in favour of having a referendum.
You just love that camera angle. Well, I think, actually, it was already time for the political parties to reform by then, yes. Because their alignment, especially within the Conservatives, I mean, obviously Labour was then coming after that, but it was already that the cracks were beginning to appear at the seams. I'll tell you, even on the Labour side, I made a conscious decision not to join the Labour Party when Ed Miliband became leader, because I felt that was too left-wing for me. Now I have nostalgia. I have nostalgia looking back at those days, thinking, my God, I'd be happy in Ed Miliband's Labour Party compared to what Corbyn then brought along after that. But the cracks were already there, and I think actually the political realignment needed to occur rather than holding our country hostage.
And still needs to occur.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still needs to occur.
I would have gone back years when you're saying, like, what went wrong. I would have gone back years when we were talking about proportional representation, and we voted against having that. And I think for me, where this all kind of went wrong was when you had UKIP, to your point. I think it got something like 4 million votes and it ended up with 1 seat in Parliament by default as well. So I think then you ended up with so many people that was so unrepresented in Parliament, and still feel, by the way, unrepresented in Parliament. So you've got this massive swell of people that feel so unrepresented, disengaged, frustrated. So you had to give the referendum to appease those people. So I think if we'd have had proportional representation and UKIP were more strongly represented, I think we could have avoided the situation in the first place, point one. And point two, once we'd had the referendum, I think where we woefully went wrong was with zero preparation at all of considering the fact that we might have gone for Brexit. And I think that was so wrong.
You mean no deal?
Yeah, sorry, yeah. I think it was... No, to have voted Brexit. So I think at the point of referendum, there was zero consideration that actually, if we Brexit, what would that look like? Because people didn't think it would happen. And then, fast forward again, my final point is... For no deal, there's never been any serious consideration of no deal. So what you have now is people going, oh, we can't crash out with no deal. Well, actually, if you'd have started considering and planning no deal years ago, 2 years ago, it wouldn't be crashing out. It would be a sensible, logical, considered option. And before I finish, let me just go to David Cameron, because we keep talking about David Cameron and saying about him calling this. Let's just look at today, recently, whether or not he regrets his decision.
Do you regret calling the referendum, Mr Cameron? Mr Cameron,
You don't? Because I don't regret calling a referendum. I made a promise in the election to call a referendum, and I called the referendum. Obviously, I'm very concerned about what's happening today, but I do support the Prime Minister in her efforts to try and have a close partnership with the European Union. That's the right thing to do, and she has my support.
There you go, no regrets.
By repute, George Osborne, who was then Chancellor, warned him against it. He said, don't do it because you could lose this, and you don't think you're going to lose this. The interesting thing is what happens now. There was an interesting poll in The Economist last week, which said if you had a people's vote again, what would happen? And if you had it just between the Remainers and the No Deal, it was 40% said they'd vote for no deal, 50% said they'd vote for Remain, and 10% didn't know. If you had it between the Remainers and the government deal, it was 46% for Remain and 38% for the government deal. So, oddly, I mean, crashing out is more popular than Mrs May's deal.
But to your point, I think if you had a second referendum, not a people's vote, a second referendum, you would need to say something around the percentages, because if you ended up in a situation where you had 48-52...
Yeah, but I'm not saying that should have been for... I don't want a second referendum, but
I know, but I'm saying if that's what gets forced through with a second referendum, I think you need to look at the percentages.
Michelle, you voted out. If there was another referendum, would you still vote out?
Yeah, I would.
And Nick would?
Oh, yeah. Because I've always said it wasn't necessarily the right time, but the principle, the European project has gone in the wrong direction.
And I'm the same as you, but I don't know anyone that voted Brexit that would change their vote. I'm not saying I don't speak for all Brexiteers.
No, I think what might happen is a lot of people that didn't vote will vote now.
I know people who voted for Brexit who would vote for who changed, but not large numbers. And I don't think the polls suggest that there's anything more than 1% would change.